This millionaire had no plans to stop, but their sign broke his heart. What he did next changed not just their lives, but his own. This is not just a story. It is a moment that restores faith in people. If you've ever believed that a small act can change a life, don't turn it off, because this story will stay with you for a long time. Post in the comments where are you watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the latest stories. In the quiet streets of a small Midwestern town, where each day seemed to unfold with a gentle rhythm and familiar faces greeted one another on weathered sidewalks, two twin boys, Jake and Luke, found themselves at the very edge of hope and hardship. The morning light filtered softly through the autumn trees, casting long shadows along a dusty roadside where an unlikely scene was unfolding. There, set against the backdrop of worn pavement and swaying wildflowers, stood an old, handcrafted toy car. Its faded paint bore the marks of care and countless hours of labor. A small, determined marvel created by two boys whose hearts carried burdens far too heavy for their tender years. Jake and Luke, both about 10 years old but wise beyond their years, had spent countless afternoons in their makeshift workshop, a corner of their rickety garage, gathering scraps of wood, bits of metal, and faded remnants of once-loved toys to create their prized possession. Every detail mattered to them. The engine compartment was painstakingly molded from old scrap, the wheels fashioned from repurposed rubber, and the vibrant colors, though worn, shone with the pure vibrancy of childhood dreams. The toy car was not just an object. It was a symbol of resolve and ingenuity, a beacon designed to attract attention and, most importantly, to raise funds that could bridge the yawning gap between despair and the promise of healing. The twins held a hand-drawn placard that read, "For sale, to help Mom recover." The simple phrase, inscribed in bold, uneven letters, spoke volumes. It was a quiet testament to the love they held for their mother, whose laughter and gentle touch were now distant memories, replaced by the sterile beeps and humming machinery of a hospital room far too unfamiliar for a child's comfort. Their mother had fallen gravely ill, a battle marked by hospital visits that stretched into endless nights and burdens that weighed heavily on her slender frame. The exact nature of her illness remained a wordless worry for the twins, a silent, pervasive sorrow. But one thing was unmistakable. The cost of her treatment was astronomical, and the family's savings were long exhausted by the daily challenge of survival. Every morning, as the town stirred to life, Jake and Luke would embark on their modest mission. Their routine was simple yet profound. Construct the toy car with a level of dedication that belied their young age, then carry it to the side of the road, setting it against the backdrop of a weary but hopeful landscape. Their eyes, wide and earnest, would scan the passing vehicles, silently pleading for empathy from strangers who might stop to consider the story behind the makeshift display. They clutched their hand-painted sign, a small shield against the harsh realities of a world that often overlooked those like them, and hoped that someone, somewhere, might be moved to help. The town itself, a patchwork of time-worn storefronts and neatly kept lawns, occasionally paused in its routine bustle to notice the twins' display. Some people offered sympathetic yet fleeting glances before returning to their own struggles, while others offered kind words and spare coins. But for the twins, every small act of kindness fueled their determination to fight against the oppressive tide of misfortune. Each coin, each moment of shared compassion, became part of a larger mosaic of hope, a reminder that even in a place where dreams were often deferred, there remained a spark capable of igniting lasting change. Inside the hospital, far from the modest scene by the roadside, their mother lay surrounded by the clinical glow of medical machines and the constant murmur of hushed conversations. Her tired eyes occasionally lifted toward the window, as if trying to catch a glimpse of the outside world that seemed so sure and unyielding. The isolation of the hospital room, a stark contrast to the rugged warmth of their home, was a daily reminder of the sacrifices made and the trials that lay ahead. Yet, in every whispered "I love you," every tearful smile that crossed her face upon hearing of her son's efforts, there resonated a steadfast belief that love, in its purest form, could conquer even the most overwhelming of challenges. Even as Jake and Luke carefully placed the toy car on the sunlit shoulder of the road, a quiet energy pulsed in the air, a feeling that something was about to change, that their small act of creativity and determination might not go unnoticed. Unbeknownst to them, far down the road, the wheels of destiny were already turning. The gentle creak of an approaching vehicle, the distant hum of an engine, and the soft murmur of a radio would soon converge to set in motion a series of events that promised to alter not only the lives of two brave little boys and their ailing mother but also the life of a man who, until that very moment, had lost all faith in the capacity for kindness. And so, as the twins stood by their humble display, their eyes shining with the quiet resolve of those who have learned to dream despite despair, the stage was set for a convergence of fates, a meeting of hearts from very different worlds. Little did they know that this was just the beginning of a transformative journey, one that would prove that even the smallest act of sincerity could spark a revolution of hope. Their story, woven with threads of struggle, love, and undying determination, was ready to unfold, promising that sometimes, within the simplest of gestures, lies the power to change the world. As the morning unfolded with a quiet resolve, Jake and Luke continued to stand near the dusty shoulder of the road, their youthful faces lit by the soft glow of early sunlight. The handcrafted toy car, bearing the tender marks of hours of careful assembly, sat as a silent testament to their determination. In front of it, the twins held their hand-painted placard, "For sale, to help Mom recover." Every brushstroke on the sign carried their heartfelt plea, a simple yet profound call for assistance in their time of desperate need. At first, the boys remained silent and hopeful, their eyes scanning the horizon with an expectation reserved for miracles. They had grown accustomed to the occasional sympathetic glance or the clinking of spare change into a small jar, but today felt different. The air was thick with the promise of change, a strange energy that rippled over the quiet road, inviting unexpected attention. It wasn't long before the calm was broken by the distant, heavy rumble of an engine approaching along the winding lane. The sound grew louder, and soon a sleek, black SUV came into view. The vehicle moved smoothly, its polished surface catching glints of sunlight as it navigated towards the roadside. Inside the luxurious cabin, behind tinted windows that shielded his face, sat Nicholas Rains, a man whose presence exuded both commanding authority and a weariness born of deep personal loss. Nicholas was no ordinary traveler. He was the renowned Millionaire CEO of an innovative medical company, a figure whose name was synonymous with breakthrough advancements in healthcare. Yet despite the accolades and the immense success that had defined his public persona, he carried within him a loneliness that all his wealth could not mend. The loss of his beloved wife had left an aching void, and the growing distance between him and his only son had compounded that sorrow. His interactions with the world had become measured and guarded, leaving him fatigued by the shallow nature of most encounters. With each mile, the weight of his burdens seemed to press more heavily upon him, until, by an unseen impulse, his eyes fell upon two figures standing by the roadside. For a brief moment, as if in slow motion, Nicholas's gaze met that of the twins. In the curious expression on Jake's face, in the silent hope glimmering in Luke's eyes, he found a reminder of something long forgotten, an innocence and vulnerability that had the power to stir even the most jaded soul. Something in that moment made him hesitate. Instead of driving past in the usual indifferent manner, Nicholas eased his foot off the accelerator. The SUV's engine softened its roar, and he allowed the vehicle to coast slowly alongside the quiet scene. Inside the cabin, the young CEO's eyes softened as he watched the boys' earnest expressions, their polite, almost pleading postures tethered to the sign that so boldly proclaimed their need. He noted the meticulous care with which the toy car had been constructed, a detail that resonated with his own passion for innovation and quality. Nicholas felt struck by the raw authenticity and vulnerability of the moment. It was as though the sight of these two young souls, standing firm in the face of their overwhelming circumstances, had reawakened in him memories of the dreams and hopes he once cherished. Although he remained silent, his instincts told him that this encounter was no mere coincidence. He could almost feel the quiet determination radiating from the twins, a determination that defied the hardships they faced. Yet, bound by his own internal struggles and the habitual reserve that often accompanied his interactions, Nicholas chose to observe quietly rather than intrude immediately. His thoughts swirled with questions and emotions. Who were these children whose eyes held the spark of steadfast hope? What stories lay behind the trembling hands clutching that fragile sign? And most importantly, what might he do to help, if only in a discreet way, without exposing his true identity or intentions right at that moment? For a long minute, the SUV parked by the side of the road as Nicholas's gaze lingered on the twins. Outside, the warm breeze stirred the leaves along the roadside, and the quiet murmur of passing traffic resumed in the distance. The twins, catching sight of the imposing vehicle, exchanged nervous glances. They were used to being ignored or met with pity, and sometimes even condescension, but not often with such deliberate attention. In that suspended moment, a silent connection was forged, a bridge between worlds that had long been separated by success and struggle. Though he had not yet spoken a word, Nicholas's heart had already begun to warm to the plight before him. The monochrome interior of the SUV, typically a barrier of formality and detachment, now felt like a temporary refuge as he silently resolved to take note of every detail. The children's tender hope, the meticulous craftsmanship of the toy car, the unspoken weight of the placard. It was a scene that promised to reshape something deep within him, to challenge his disillusionment with the world. And as he finally pressed the accelerator gently, this time slowing his progress, he drove past the twins with a look in his eye that spoke of a plan in its early inception. A plan that, if fate allowed, would soon intertwine his life with theirs in ways none of them could yet imagine. After Nicholas had parked his SUV a few paces away, the warm afternoon light softened the hard angles of his usually impassive expression. Stepping out with a measured calm, he slowly approached the twins standing beside the toy car. The gravel crunched under his polished shoes as he drew nearer, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Jake and Luke, who had been nervously clutching their handmade placard, exchanged a brief, uncertain look before mustering the courage to speak. "Hi," Jake began in a trembling voice, the words barely above a whisper. He adjusted the faded sign in his small hands. We're selling this car to help our mom." Luke's eyes shone with a mix of hope and sorrow as he continued. "Mom's very sick. The hospital bills, they're too high. We don't have enough money. And every day, we try to collect what we can so she can get the treatment she needs." Nicholas quietly observed the boys, his features softening as compassion flickered in his eyes. He had long been accustomed to the gray, impersonal transactions of his world, where every problem had a price tag and every solution was measured in figures and strategies. But here, in the raw innocence of this conversation, he was confronted with a reality far removed from boardroom negotiations and quarterly reports. "Your mom," Nicholas murmured, the tone gentle as he knelt to meet their eyes. "Tell me more about her. How is she doing?" Jake hesitated, glancing at his twin before replying. "She's in the hospital, in a room with machines that beep, and we're all the time. We see her when we can, and every time we're frightened that we might not return home." His voice wavered, yet the courage in his tone was unmistakable. A plea for help and understanding wrapped into a single youthful admission. Luke, his voice steadier albeit laced with worry, added, "We made the car ourselves. Every part of it. It reminded us of how much we can create if we work together. But it's not enough on its own. We hoped that someone might see it and understand that we need help. Because Mom needs medicine, tests, and proper care." Nicholas's gaze lingered on the toy car, a fragile creation of ingenuity built from scrap and hope. It was a mirror of the boys' dreams, their fastidious work a silent testament to resilience in the face of insurmountable odds. "It's very impressive," he said quietly, his voice betraying a hint of admiration. "I can see the care you put into every detail. It's not just a toy. It's your hope, isn't it?" At that, Jake nodded vigorously, his small hands clenching at the placard. "Yes, sir. We want to help our mom get better. We work so hard. But sometimes hard work isn't enough when you face something so big." For a long moment, the three of them stood in the quiet hum of an ordinary street that had suddenly become the stage for an extraordinary exchange. Nicholas's mind raced with memories of his own losses, of the wife he had loved and the gap that had widened between him and his son. His heart, long shielded by layers of corporate caution and personal grief, started to thaw in the presence of the boy's earnest sorrow. "I wish I could help," he said softly, more to himself than to them, and then looked directly into their eyes. "Maybe, tell me what exactly happened. How did things come to be so difficult?" Luke took a deep breath, his voice filled with both vulnerability and an unexpected strength. "Our mom was always strong. She worked 2 jobs so we wouldn't go hungry. But a few months ago she got really sick. So sick that she had to be taken to the hospital. The doctors say her condition is serious, and every day there are more tests, more medicine, and more bills." His small face was etched with the strain of a burden far beyond his years. "We tried to do everything on our own. We've been saving our pennies, working little chores whenever we could, and now we built this car in the hope that someone would see what we're going through." Nicholas listened intently, feeling as if each word was a brushstroke that painted a picture of a life filled with struggles, but also with the kind of unyielding love and determination rare in his world. "And you built the car by yourselves?" he asked, his tone both kind and incredulous. Jake smiled shyly, pride intermingled with sorrow as he replied, "Yes, it took us weeks, and every piece was a promise that we wouldn't give up, even when things seemed impossible." In that moment, Nicholas recognized the raw truth of their situation. Here were 2 brave souls, standing on a roadside with nothing but the strength of their will and the creativity of their small hands. Their hope was fragile, yet potent enough to cut through the indifference of the world. "You both are very special," he said, his voice imbued with a quiet conviction that stirred something deep within him. "Sometimes, the smallest voices have the power to remind us of what truly matters." The gentle sincerity in his words, unburdened by corporate jargon or calculated intent, opened a door in the boys' wary hearts. They looked up at him, eyes shimmering with cautious hope. Will you help us?" Luke finally asked, his tone tentative yet laced with the desperate hope of a child seeking a lifeline. Nicholas hesitated for a fraction of a second, a moment that stretched into an eternity for the twins, before answering, "I promise I'll listen, and together, we'll see if we can find a way to bring the help you need." Thus, on that quiet street corner, as the warm afternoon light bathed the trio in golden hues, the first dialogue had planted a seed of possibility. A promise that, even amidst despair, compassion and determination could forge a path toward healing. In the simple exchange of words, genuine connection was born. A connection that would soon ripple outward to transform not only the lives of these 2 resilient boys and their ailing mother, but also the hardened heart of a man who, for the first time in many long years, allowed himself to believe in the power of kindness. After the quiet promise exchanged on that sunlit roadway, Nicholas Rains returned to his SUV with his mind teeming with resolve. The image of the timid, determined twins, Jake and Luke, and their heartfelt plea reverberated in his thoughts. He couldn't ignore the raw emotion behind their words, nor the subtle conviction that insisted their mother deserved a chance at healing. That day, as he drove away, he silently vowed to make a difference in their lives, even if his help must remain shrouded in a layer of anonymity. Back in his upscale office, tucked away in the polished towers of his medical innovations company, Nicholas began putting his plan into motion. While he wrestled privately with his own grief and the echo of lost family ties, the spark of the twins' unwavering hope awakened something powerful inside him, a yearning to restore faith in humanity through discreet acts of kindness. Before the board meeting could unfold and before spreadsheets and projections filled the stark meeting halls, he turned his focus toward one singular act: to help the struggling family without letting his identity as a billionaire CEO overshadow the genuine spirit of the gesture. In his spacious, softly lit study filled with leather-bound books and memories of better times, Nicholas picked up a fountain pen, a relic symbolic of the past, and began drafting a heartfelt letter. His words, carefully chosen and imbued with empathy, were addressed to the mother. Although he knew she might never learn who he was, he wanted her to feel seen, to know that even in the darkest moments, a silent angel had taken notice. The letter explained that help had been arranged confidentially, that funds would be sent directly to cover her immediate medical expenses and to procure the vital medicines she desperately needed. Nicholas assured her that this assistance came not out of performative charity but as a compassionate act orchestrated by someone who understood loss and loneliness, someone who had once felt the sting of life's cruelties. As he folded the letter into an envelope adorned with his handwritten signature, subtly concealing his identity behind a pseudonym, the millionaire made one more decisive move. Using secure channels, he initiated a series of anonymous relief donations to the hospital's billing department and a trusted local charity network that specialized in aiding families in medical crises. He arranged for the funds to be transferred directly, ensuring that there would be no interference from the bureaucracy of the system he so despised. At the same time, he coordinated with a discreet courier service to deliver a box of urgently needed and state-of-the-art medicines to the hospital, along with instructions for care that could ease her pain and bolster her treatment. That evening, under the warm glow of streetlights and the quiet hum of nighttime activity in the town, a knock sounded at the modest home where the twins and their mother lived. The door opened to reveal an envelope and a small package left on the doorstep, a lifeline wrapped in mystery. Inside the envelope, the mother found the gentle letter filled with heartfelt encouragement and assurances of help, and within the package lay essential medicines and details of additional support. The words on the paper, written in elegant, deliberate handwriting, spoke of hope, dignity, and the promise that sometimes help comes when least expected. Jake and Luke, witnessing this quiet miracle at their doorway, felt a cautious surge of relief mixed with disbelief. They huddled close as their mother read the letter aloud in a trembling but determined voice, a voice that, for a moment, bridged the painful gaps of their uncertain world. The note did not claim credit with an ostentatious signature, declaring instead that a friend believes in you, urging them to keep faith and fight on. In that tender, transformative moment, the family sensed that the tides were beginning to turn. Even as the hospital's sterile corridors continued to belabor the struggle for life, here was a beacon of aid, small yet potent enough to kindle the flame of hope in a place long overshadowed by despair. Meanwhile, Nicholas, watching from afar through encrypted updates provided by his discreet allies at the hospital, allowed himself a quiet smile of satisfaction. For the first time in many long years, his actions were driven not by profit margins or cold calculations, but by a profound empathy that transcended the boundary between wealth and need. An anonymous benefactor had stepped into the lives of a family that had been resigned to silent suffering, and in doing so, Nicholas embraced a redemption he hadn't known was possible. As twilight deepened into night, the quiet act of delivering help resonated like a soft promise. A promise that even small, unseen gestures of kindness could bridge the divide between worlds. And as the family began to feel the reassuring pulse of hope, every whispered thank you and every tear of gratitude became part of a larger narrative. That no one, no matter how lost or alone, is beyond the reach of compassion. The anonymous relief packages and heartfelt letter had already begun to work their quiet miracles. Within days, the twins' mother showed signs of improvement, a slight ease in her labored breathing, and a shimmer of a smile during rare moments when family visited her in the hospital. Yet just as hope began to blossom, the dark undercurrents of a callous system surfaced, tearing at the newly formed threads of change. Nicholas Rains, watching from behind secure lines and discreet updates provided by his contacts at the hospital, was alarmed to learn that despite his generous donations and carefully orchestrated supply of medicines, the hospital management had rebuffed further assistance. Even more shocking was the revelation that the very institution caring for the ailing mother was owned by his own holding company. A joint venture, established years ago, now lay buried beneath layers of bureaucratic indifference and profit-driven priorities. The hospital's management had turned a blind eye to the desperate pleas for help, citing strict budgetary allocations and procedural red tape. Their cold refusal to expedite crucial treatments contradicted the very mission the hospital purported to uphold. Late one evening, as Nicholas sat in his private office, reviewing internal memos from the hospital's administrative department, his heart sank. The memos, filled with clinical language and devoid of human empathy, breezed past lines about cost-saving measures, resource reallocation, and adherence to protocol, all meant to justify the delay in providing life-saving treatments for his patient. The callousness echoed how decisions were made in ivory towers, separated from the reality of human suffering. Every word on that document stung like a blow, not only to the twins who had placed their hope in this system but also to the man who had once embraced a future of progress and innovation in medicine. Determined to confront this inhumanity head-on, Nicholas spent hours tracing the labyrinthine paths of internal communications. Through furtive conversations with sympathetic hospital staff, doctors and nurses who were equally frustrated by the system's rigidity, he pieced together a network of errors and intentional oversight. The management had been overzealous in enforcing budget cuts, refusing even basic emergency funds to cover the soaring costs of his dear patient's treatment. It became clear that the hospital's reluctance to act was less about fiscal responsibility and more about a deafening, institutional indifference to personal suffering. Here, the cold calculations of balance sheets had overridden compassion, and the very structure meant to save lives was instead harming them. Haunted by memories of his own losses, the quiet grief of a widower and the distant relationship with his son, Nicholas felt a surge of indignation. How could an institution, whose founding principles were supposed to honor human life, reduce the plight of a suffering mother to mere numbers on a ledger? The betrayal was bitter, especially as it came from an organization connected to his own empire, a piece of his legacy that had, inadvertently, become ensnared in a web of greed and apathy. His earlier anonymous donations, meant to be a lifeline, had been stifled by an unyielding system. Fueled by a mounting resolve, Nicholas decided that this conflict could no longer be monitored from a distance. The healthcare system's failure was an affront not only to the family in desperate need, but to every individual who believed that warmth and humanity should stand at the center of medical care. Late into the night, Nicholas began planning his next move. A decisive intervention that would cut through the layers of bureaucracy and force the hidden hands of corporate indifference to step aside. He resolved to leverage the vast influence of his holding company to insist on a reevaluation of the hospital's policies. A move that was as personal as it was professional. In his heart, he knew that this battle was about much more than just one case. It was about restoring dignity and compassion to a system that had long succumbed to profit above all else. And so, with the ghosts of his past urging him forward, Nicholas prepared to step out from the shadows of anonymity. His decision to confront the hospital's management marked the turning point, one that promised to shake the very foundations of the healthcare system and herald a new era, where a patient's life was valued above mere numbers. In this defining moment, the harshness of the institution was met with a resolute force powered by empathy, ambition, and the unyielding belief that compassion must prevail. Determined to shatter the apathy that had cost a life-saving opportunity, Nicholas Rains resolved that no more idle words or quiet donations would suffice. Now armed with incontrovertible evidence of mismanagement and a fiery resolve born of his own personal losses, he prepared to stage a bold intervention that would not only save one life, but also force a transformation within the very system meant to care for the vulnerable. Under the veil of an early dawn, Nicholas convened an emergency board meeting with top executives and trusted advisors at his holding company. Set against the sterile elegance of a high-rise conference room, the atmosphere was charged with tension and a palpable sense of inevitability. As the meeting commenced, Nicholas laid out the damning internal reports he had painstakingly collected over the previous weeks. Detailed memos documenting how vital funds were being suppressed, unjustifiably withheld, and misappropriated under the guise of stringent budget controls. The hospital, which once prided itself on its cutting-edge technology and compassionate care, was now mired in bureaucratic cruelty. Enough is enough, Nicholas stated firmly, his voice echoing off the walls as he presented a series of annotated documents that showcased every missed opportunity for timely intervention in his patient's care. Our system has failed one of our own. Every delay, every red tape process through these hallways has cost a human life. I will not allow this to continue, not on my watch. His tone was both resolute and imbued with the weight of a man who had once loved deeply and lost much. With his piercing gaze, he challenged the complacency that had taken root in places once dedicated to healing. He moved swiftly into tactical measures. Within hours of the meeting's conclusion, Nicholas arranged for a complete overhaul of the hospital's emergency protocols. He restructured lines of financial authority, dissolving the old chains of approval that delayed procurement of critical medications and diverted funds away from patient care. Emergency grants were issued without delay, bypassing the convoluted procedures that had held his patient hostage to bureaucracy. Simultaneously, he summoned a special task force comprising his most trusted medical advisors, compliance officers, and a small cadre of sympathetic doctors from the hospital. Their mission was clear: reassess the treatment plan immediately, ensuring that every necessary step was taken to provide his patient with the best possible care. As the hospital leadership scrambled to adapt to Nicholas's uncompromising directives, the wheels of change began to turn rapidly. An elite team of medical professionals was dispatched to reevaluate the mother's condition. In the quiet corridors of her hospital room, where once there had been uncertainty and delays, the tone now shifted to urgency and hope. Advanced diagnostic tests were expedited. Consultations with renowned specialists were arranged on an emergency basis. Detailed treatment plans, once mired in a tide of administrative hesitations, were immediately sanctioned and implemented. The mother, whose once labored breathing began to ease with the timely administration of cutting-edge medications and precisely calibrated therapies, became the epicenter of a renewed commitment to care. Nurses, previously bound by inflexible schedules dictated by cost-saving imperatives, now found themselves empowered to work at the pace of necessity, their hands guided by compassion rather than corporate diktats. Gradually, the daughters and sons' whispered prayers in the sterile room were answered by tangible signs of recovery. Improved test results, the sound of steady heart monitors, and the gentle return of her smile as she recognized that her life, once threatened by neglect, was being relentlessly fought for. Back at his headquarters, Nicholas continued to monitor the cascade of changes with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal redemption. His discreet disclosures to the media, carefully managed through select press releases that recounted a story of unforeseen corporate reform rather than a scandal, began to reshape public perceptions about the impersonal nature of healthcare administration. The news spread fast. A high-profile intervention had catalyzed a radical change within one of the largest medical networks in the country, prompting calls for systemic reviews nationwide. For the twins, Jake and Luke, the change was nothing short of miraculous. One afternoon, just as golden sunlight bathed the hospital gardens, they were granted a brief moment with their mother. With tearful smiles and words too fragile to be fully spoken, the twins watched as their mother, now noticeably healthier, embraced them with a tenderness they feared had been lost forever. Their gratitude was unspoken but deep, a recognition that the seemingly insurmountable challenges of life could be overturned, that even the most tangled knots of despair could be unraveled by a spark of genuine humanity. In the midst of these transformative events, Nicholas found himself increasingly drawn out of anonymity. While he had initiated his measures quietly, the success of his actions could no longer remain hidden. Yet, rather than seeking adulation or reclaiming lost glory, he continued to work behind the scenes, channeling his resources into reforming the entire network. He spearheaded the introduction of new ethical standards, robust oversight mechanisms, and comprehensive support programs aimed at preventing any recurrence of such indifference. Among these was a groundbreaking initiative, a scholarship and mentorship program in the name of his late wife, designed to support young talent from underprivileged backgrounds, a subtle echo of the hope that had been sparked on a quiet roadside. As the medical treatments progressed over the ensuing weeks, it became clear that the mother's recovery was not just a temporary reprieve but a full turnaround. Her condition stabilized dramatically, and she transitioned from intensive treatment to a phase of comprehensive rehabilitation. With every progressive checkup and every informed smile from her medical team, the story of a woman once on the brink of despair was rewritten into a narrative of resilience and fortitude. The hospital, too, began to show signs of reform. The previously rigid management was forced to realign its priorities, shedding layers of bureaucratic inertia in favor of a patient-first approach. By the time the final phase of her recovery was announced, a complete cessation of critical treatment protocols in favor of long-term wellness plans, there was an air of triumph that resonated well beyond the hospital walls. Here was a vivid reminder that even in the complex interplay of power, money, and indifference, a single decisive act of compassion could realign the course of life. Nicholas, once disillusioned by the caprices of adult detachment, rediscovered his belief in the inherent goodness of human beings. His intervention had not only saved a life, but had ignited a transformative change that promised to ripple outwards, affecting others who had long been trapped by an unyielding system. In that twilight moment, when hope, determination, and human resilience converged, Nicholas reflected on the power of genuine action. The mother's recovery was not just a personal victory for a family in need. It was a beacon that shone on the dark corners of a flawed system, reminding everyone that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, when met with relentless resolve, could transform lives and redefine futures. A full year had passed since that life-changing day on the roadside, and the ripples of kindness had transformed every life it touched. In a modest, warmly lit living room of a renovated house in the same small town, Jake and Luke now sat together, their eyes shining with quiet confidence. Over the months, the boys had grown not only taller in stature but also richer in spirit. Their mother, once confined to the sterile isolation of a hospital room, was now at home, her voice stronger, her laughter richer, a living testament to resilience and recovery. Friends and neighbors marveled at the transformation in her, and she, in turn, dedicated herself to sharing her story with others, inspiring the community to believe in second chances and the healing power of love. The hospital, which had once epitomized bureaucratic apathy, had undergone a radical overhaul. Under the decisive intervention initiated by Nicholas Rains, the institution had embraced a patient-first philosophy. New leadership, bolstered by stringent reforms and a renewed commitment to compassion, had replaced the old guard. Policies were rewritten, accountability was enforced, and soon the hospital emerged as a model of humane, efficient medical care. For patients and their families, the once distant corridors of indifference were now corridors of genuine care and hope. At the helm of these sweeping changes stood Nicholas Rains, no longer the solitary, disillusioned executive he had once been. Slowly, as the success of his anonymous intervention blossomed into wider reform, Nicholas found that his own life was changing. As he reconnected with lost parts of himself through acts of compassion, a tender bond began to form between him and his estranged son. Shared moments over dinner, collaborative projects at his office, and quiet, heartfelt conversations rekindled the familial warmth that had long been overshadowed by his corporate burdens. In these reassurances, Nicholas rediscovered not only the meaning of his success but also the quiet joy of being part of a family again. Every day, in the midst of balancing the high stakes of his business and the ongoing waves of healthcare reforms, Nicholas would find solace in the smallest of reminders. In his spacious, meticulously organized office, adorned with accolades and modern art, a cherished memento occupied a place of honor on his mahogany desk. The very same handcrafted toy car once built by Jake and Luke. Its presence was a constant, gentle reminder of that fateful encounter. A symbol of hope born out of desperate circumstances, of the resilience of two brave twins whose honest determination had rekindled a spark in his guarded heart. Whenever the stresses of board meetings or corporate strategy sessions threatened to overwhelm him, Nicholas found that a simple glance at the miniature toy could momentarily transport him back to that quiet roadside moment, where innocence and possibility had bridged the gulf between despair and redemption. The transformative impact of that day extended beyond individual lives. Inspired by the twins' ingenuity and perseverance, Nicholas had launched a new foundation in honor of his late wife. This foundation focused on empowering children from underprivileged backgrounds to pursue careers in engineering, medicine, and technology, fields that promised not only personal growth but also the potential to change the world. As part of this initiative, Jake and Luke were awarded full scholarships and mentored by professionals who believed in their talents as much as they believed in the intrinsic value of every human dream. In local community centers, neighborhood gatherings, and even in corporate boardrooms, the story of that small toy car had become a legend, a parable of how a moment of pure, childlike sincerity could ripple upward to transform entire systems. It was a story recounted in soft voices and impassioned speeches alike, a narrative that challenged the notion that success was solely measured in numbers or titles. Instead, success was now understood to be woven from empathy, vision, and the courage to act when others remain silent. One bright afternoon, as the golden sun filtered through the windows of his office, Nicholas sat quietly at his desk with the toy car in front of him. In that still moment, he reflected on all that had transpired: the recovery of a beloved mother, the rekindling of lost relationships, the sweeping transformation of an indifferent system, and the unexpected return of hope in his own life. He smiled softly, aware that the toy car symbolized more than just the memory of a past act of kindness. It was a reminder that every small gesture profoundly matters, that a single act of compassion can indeed set off a cascade of change. Sometimes childlike sincerity can change an adult's heart, and one toy car can represent an entire life. Subscribe so you won't miss the next story that may once again move you to tears.